I was on the subway. It was 4 o'clock in the morning and I was going to the gym and I saw this healthy looking lady. So I went to go speak to her and it wasn't a healthy young woman. She was like a grandmother. And I was like, how do you look so young? And I thought I was on candid camera. She says, I'm on something called a raw food diet. And I could not believe it. I was like, wow.
So welcome to another session of Grand Rounds. We have the delight of having a special guest, Mr. Paul Nison, here with us tonight. And when I started my vegan journey years ago, he was one of the giants in the field, particularly in the areas of raw. Mr. Nison, at the age of 20, was diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease. And this comes in the form of two components, either Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. It can actually be a deadly disease. Oftentimes, individuals on lots of steroids or other forms of immune suppressing medications to keep it under control. His search for a cure began with medical doctors, but they didn't have any answers he needed. After trying almost every so-called cure to overcome his pain and suffering, he finally discovered the benefits of eating more simply after turning to a more simple diet called the raw food diet, consisting of just that, raw foods. Paul was amazed at how quickly his health returned. His return to health and a simpler life was just the beginning of a path that would bring him to question connection between today's fast-paced urban lifestyle and the sadly disease state in which many people find themselves. His extensive research on the topic of health and diet led him to write 3 books on the topic. As Paul continued to study, he was led to read the Bible, where he found a massive amount of health information with the scriptures of the Bible. These scriptures became the topic of Paul's next book, Healing According to the Scriptures. Paul was on a mission to bring the message of health and healing to the world. Welcome. Take us back to that time when you were ill and what you were going through, I guess, emotionally, and what were some of the specific things that led you to this simple, raw, plant-based diet against the recommendation of your doctors?
Yeah, I was growing up in New York and I was just very much into sports and just trying to excel in sports. And I was able to do that as a teenager. I could eat just about anything and ate just about anything. And then when I was 19 years old, started getting some stomach pains. So then that kept happening. And then one time I started bleeding in my stool. After going back and forth to the doctors, they finally diagnosed me with inflammatory bowel disease. There wasn't a lot of information about that. This was like 30 years ago. So they did what they're supposed to do. I mean, you're a doctor. You understand the connection between drugs cure. We know they relieve the pain. They're more of a pain relief, but not a cure. But it works. Steroids cured by inflammation. That's what they do. And the doctors put me on prednisone steroids and it reduced the inflammation. The problem is they never mentioned diet. And when I got off the steroids, problem kept coming back because now I wasn't taking the medication and I couldn't live like that. So somebody told me that if I changed my diet, I wouldn't have colon issues. And then at the time I asked my doctor if there any connection between my diet and my condition. And she said there are no medical studies to prove there was any connection between diet and your colitis. And at that time I was trained to listen to her, so I did, but I kept getting sick. And then somebody told me, if I stopped eating animals, I'd feel much better. Without telling my doctor what I was going to do, I stopped eating animals. And I started to get sick less often. I started to feel better. This doctor's amazing. Every time she told me something, I did the opposite and I felt better. Then somebody told me if I reduced the stress in my life, my condition would continue to heal. So I did what I was trained to do at that time. I asked my doctor, if I reduce the stress from my life, will my condition continue to heal? And guess what she told me?
No.
She said there's no medical studies to prove any connection between stress and your condition. So when she told me that, I knew I had to reduce the stress in my life. So the first thing I did to reduce the stress was I stopped going to see my doctor. Right away, I felt better. And then I had to get out of my stressful lifestyle in New York City, and I looked to move to somewhere stressless, and I ended up moving here to West Palm Beach, Florida. And without ever hearing of raw food in my life, I ended up moving next to a place called the Hippocrates Health Institute.
Oh, wow.
And the Hippocrates Health Institute is a world-class health spa where they teach people how to get better from diseases that doctors have given up on and people that the doctors have given up on, and people get better by eliminating cooked food from their diets. So I called my doctor up in New York City and I said, I'm gonna go on this diet and get better. Will the raw food diet work for me? Guess what she told me?
No studies.
No studies to show that'll work. In fact, it's really bad for you. So she told me that. I knew I was on the right path. That's the last time I spoke to my doctor, and I started on this raw food diet, and I got better almost immediately. So I was that crazy guy in the supermarket running after everybody, telling them what they're eating is poison, it's going to kill them. And everyone thought this guy's crazy. And between the way I was acting and the way I looked, I can't blame them. So then I said, I got to get out of here and I got to move somewhere where I don't look crazy, where I fit in. So I moved back to New York City, and I wasn't going to tell anyone there about the raw food diet, what I was doing or anything. I was just going to do my own thing and not tell anyone. And then I ended up one day opening the world's biggest raw food restaurant with another lady. And I had that. And then I ended up interviewing a bunch of people that were eating this way for a really long time. And many of those people became good friends. I put all those interviews into a book. It was my first book called The Raw Life. When I grew up, even though my parents are Jewish, I grew up close to being an atheist. I just believed in the physical body. I didn't believe in anything besides that. Now, when I got sick and I got healed, I started to believe in like everything. Yeah. And it wasn't until years later, after I've been traveling and everything else, I met somebody at a lecture and they said, your book is the second best health book I've ever read. And I said, well, what's the first? And I said, does it have stories about people? And does it talk about raw foods? And does it talk about people living long lives and all the other aspects of health, like fasting and praying and all the things I've learned over the years? They said, absolutely. I said, well, I'd like to read this book. And they said it was the Bible. And I said, no, it's not. And they said, well, have you ever read it? I said, no. They said, well, how do you know? So I read it to prove them wrong. I started teaching in churches about health, about the diet that's found in Genesis 1:29. And then I realized in the Bible, it doesn't always say what to eat as the food for man and fruits and vegetables. It says when to eat. Our Creator made us to eat food when we can see it. If he wanted us to eat at nighttime, he would have made fruits and vegetables glow in the dark. We couldn't see it at nighttime. When you think about creation and the seasons, in the wintertime, the foods are heavier, but if we're only eating the daytime hours, we eat less food, but it sustains us longer. In the summertime, the days are longer, but the foods that are in season in the summertime are lighter, so we can eat more and eat later. And then when electricity came in and people started staying up later and later and later, that's when all the disease started to continue to rise and everything else. There's different stages to the daylight diet. Okay. The first thing I tell people is you got to get out of the habit of eating late at night. And if you have to eat all day long during the day, just so you don't eat at night, then that's step one. Eventually, we want to get to a place where we're not eating when we first wake up, and we're eating as little as possible before going to sleep. 2 meals a day, not eating in between meals, and spacing that well enough. And this way you can get to sleep on an empty stomach and not eat all the way the next day. And a lot of that depends on what your sleeping schedule is. Sleep's such a tremendous important part of health.
It's probably more important to put the distance between the sleep hours than the awake hours. Would you say that?
It's not a good habit to just jump out of bed and eat, especially something heavy like a fat that many people do. But yes, it's definitely more important to go to sleep on an empty stomach, because most people have a bowel movement in the morning. But I think it's better to have a bowel movement at night, because I don't want to be sleeping with all that stuff in me. To clean out at night and sleep on an empty stomach, like literally an empty stomach.
Is it more important to follow the daylight eating pattern that you outlined, regardless of whether it's cooked plant-based diet or raw, than to have a raw diet where you're eating late?
Yeah, definitely not to eat late. You cook food and not eating late would be better, but ultimately, if you are eating cooked food, it shouldn't be later in the night, maybe earlier, because it takes longer to digest. I like to juice in the morning. I like to get a green vegetable juice in my morning at some point. I think everyone should juice every day. Everyone does coffee every day, which is terrible. Replace that coffee with a green juice and your health will change. If you just do one thing, do that, and your health will change. Replace your coffee with a green vegetable juice. And if you're using a microwave oven in your house, get rid of that microwave and replace it with a juicer. No one is healthy drinking coffee and having a microwave oven in their house. It's so bad because it completely nukes the food in an unscientific way, I'll say that, where it destroys every nutrient in the food and everything in the food completely, and you're just eating a bunch of waste. Most people fry something for dinner and reheat it in a microwave the next day, and they wonder why they're sick.
Fried one day and nuke it the next day. That's quite impressive. Take us to your farm. Give us your insight into the nature of our food today.
Until you grow food or people grow food, you really don't know what food is. For me, I just started growing. I had a small courtyard. I just started growing what I could. And I found out it's so easy to grow food. You can grow sprouts like sunflower seeds. You soak them overnight. You put them in a tray of dirt and water them. And next thing you know, you got these big green sunflower shoots, and you could juice them, you could eat them, and you can't buy food in the store that's good like that. I got over 100 different varieties of mangoes, different varieties, and the store-bought mangoes are so bad, and they're just not the same. And you know, people don't know that because they're not growing real food. I actually have a channel now called Fruitful Trees where I talk about growing fruit trees, and it's such a joy because for me, it's all about the Bible and creation and nature. And when I see fruit and flowers, I think, wow, what a creator we have, right? And he designed us to be frutivores, not to kill an animal and eat it. When you put an apple and a cow next to each other, our natural instinct is that apple looks great, not I'm going to kill that cow and eat it.
Well, we can't eat the cow unless we process it, but that's another story. There are other aspects of life. The comment you made, simple diet and simple life, and I like that. Obviously, enjoying what you do, being passionate about what you do is very important.
How we look at life is really important. I acknowledge that what I'm doing, I do because I don't want to get sick again. I could sit down with a person who's eating an animal, and that's what they're doing, and I'm doing something different. But that stress can definitely affect our health. And you know, I tell people now, do what works for you, because people always try to tell me you need to eat meat or you're going to die. And I'm like, do what works for you. If it's working for you, then good. But if not, give me a call.
Paul, this has been an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot as usual tonight, and we're going to be a better community for it. So thank you very much.
You all keep up the great work. And just remember, if you have a bad day, you know, there's a difference between people that stay down or people that get up. It's not how many times you fall, it's how quickly you get up.